Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, our mission is to uncover the invisible logic that is quietly running the world.
And, we mean that literally, the invisible logic.
Exactly. We are getting into a really fascinating paper by Robert French and Philip Oreopoulos. It was published by the National Bureau of Economic Research.
Right. It's called Applying Behavioral Economics to Public Policy in Canada.
And the goal for you, the listener, today is we want to pull back the curtain. We want to show you exactly how governments are using these tiny, almost totally invisible micro nudges to rewrite the destinies of millions of people.
And doing it without taking away a single ounce of your free will.
Right, which is the wildest part. It is completely mind-blowing. So to kick this off, I want to give you a scenario. Picture this.
Okay, let's hear it.
You just got off a packed subway train. You know the feeling. Long day, you are totally exhausted, and you're heading toward the station exit.
Oh, yeah. I'm just trying to get home.
Right. So right in front of you, there are two options. On the left, a set of regular stairs. And they are completely empty, like wide open.
Okay.
On the right, there's an escalator. But it is just jammed with people. You literally have to stand in this slow, sluggish line just to get on the very bottom step. So which one do you choose?
I mean, if we actually look at the observational data on human behavior in transit stations, the vast majority of people will just wait for the escalator.
Even if the stairs are technically faster right there.
Even then.
We
yeah.
just wait in the line. I wait, you wait, we all do it. But why, are we just inherently lazy creatures? Because traditional economics has a very, flattering answer for this.
Oh, very flattering.
Mm-hmm.
The standard theory, classical economics, assumes that you and I are these completely rational, hyper-calculating machines.
Right, like we are running complex algorithms in our heads at all times.
Exactly. So the theory says that standing at the bottom of those stairs, we are subconsciously weighing the long-term cardiovascular health benefits of climbing against the immediate physical cost of, the sweat and the effort.
We do the math.
We do the math, and the escalator simply wins the cost-benefit analysis. It assumes we have this perfect cognitive ability to calculate the lifetime net benefit of everything we do.
Which, is a beautiful theory. It's so clean. It's so logical.
But as this paper points out, it is also completely bankrupt.
Totally. Because if that theory were true, right, if we were actually just these rational calculators, then the only way a government could get you to take the stairs would be to violently alter the math.
Yeah, you would literally have to pay citizens like $5 every time they climb the stairs.
Or just ban escalators entirely.
Right, or put a toll booth at the bottom of the escalator to artificially inflate the financial cost. You have to change the core variables.
But that is not what actually works in the real world. And this is the first real face-slapping moment of this deep dive.
Yeah, let's talk about Hamburg.
Yes. A few years ago, city officials in a subway station in Hamburg, Germany, decided to test a totally different hypothesis. They did not change the physical effort of the stairs. They didn't alter the financial costs.
They literally just painted them.
Painted them bright red with these crisp white lines, so the stairs looked exactly like an Olympic running track. They even stenciled little runners on the steps.
Which, on the surface just sounds like a cute municipal art project.
Right, and logically, that shouldn't change my internal algorithm at all. A painted stair burns the exact same number of calories as a gray concrete stair.
But it completely changed the behavior. People suddenly started bypassing that crowded escalator just to walk up the running track.
And then the researchers in Sweden took this even further.
Oh, the piano stairs. This is a classic experiment.
It is so wild. They went into a busy subway station and they painted the stairs to look like a giant piano keyboard, black and white keys. But they didn't just paint them.
No, they wired them up.
Yeah, with pressure sensors and speakers. So when you stepped on a stair, it actually played a musical note out loud.
They turned public infrastructure into a giant playable instrument. And if you think about the variables there, the physical effort of climbing the piano stairs was identical to normal stairs. The time cost was identical. The financial cost was zero.
Nothing changed on a spreadsheet.
Nothing. But the behavioral shift was violent. 66% more people spontaneously chose the stairs over the escalator.
A 66% spike. Just from making a staircase play a C major chord.
It's incredible.
It really makes you rethink everything.
Yeah.
If we are supposedly these deeply rational calculators making calculated life choices, making a staircase play a little tune shouldn't rewrite our math at all. It shouldn't override our exhaustion from a long day at work. So what does this actually say about us?
Well, it reveals that we don't just calculate. We crave salience.
Salience, like things that stand out.
Exactly. We are deeply drawn to novelty, to things that break the visual monotony of our environment. But more than that, it proves we are highly responsive to things that are just inherently fun.
Make it fun.
Right. The Swedish piano stairs proved that the absolute cheapest, most effective way to change a population's behavior at scale isn't to subsidize them, and it isn't to threaten them with fines. It's to make the right choice incredibly obvious, or just inject a sense of play into it.
It is crazy to think about. We walk around thinking we are the CEOs of our own lives, drafting these brilliant strategic plans, but really, a huge part of our brain just wants to jump on a giant piano.
That is exactly it. And when you connect that reality to the broader scope of public governance, it forces a complete restructuring of how policy is written. That is the beating heart of behavioral economics.
Taking the psychology and forcing it into the economics.
Yeah. It demands that we acknowledge our cognitive biases. We do not consistently act in our own long-term best interests. But once a government understands the specific shape of those biases, they can start designing systems that actually work for the biological brains we have, rather than the perfectly rational brains economists wish we had.
Which brings us perfectly to the first massive biological glitch we need to talk about. I want you, the listener, to think about how you process temptation.
Oh, this is a big one.
Right. Like, why is it that when you make a plan for tomorrow, it is so incredibly easy to say, I'm going to choose the healthy salad over the greasy burger? You have total discipline for tomorrow.
Always. Tomorrow I am perfect.
Right. But when that exact same burger is sitting right in front of your face today, sizzling and smelling amazing, resisting it becomes this monumental physical struggle.
It genuinely feels like two completely different people are making the decision.
And neuroscientifically speaking, that's almost literally true.
It is. This introduces a foundational concept we call present bias.
Let's ground this in the juice experiment. There was this fascinating MRI study done back in 2007 by a researcher named McClure and his colleagues.
Yeah, they wanted to see this internal conflict happen in real time. So they brought university students into a lab, deliberately made them very, very thirsty, and then put them inside an MRI scanner.
So they could actually watch the blood flow in the brain. They could see exactly which neural networks were firing when the students had to make a choice.
Exactly.
So imagine you are a thirsty student in this noisy MRI tube. And through the intercom, the researchers offer you a choice. Option A, we will give you 1 sip of cold juice, but you have to wait 20 minutes for it. Or option B, we'll give you 2 sips of juice, but you have to wait 25 minutes.
Now, if we look at the pure math of that offer, it's an incredibly simple trade-off. The baseline waiting period is mostly irrelevant. The core decision is simply, are you willing to endure 5 extra minutes of waiting to double your reward?
And when the payoff was scheduled for the future like that, the students were brilliant rational calculators. 70% of them effortlessly chose option B.
They had no problem waiting the extra 5 minutes for more juice.
None at all. But then the researchers ran the second phase of the experiment. They offered the exact same mathematical trade-off, but they shifted the timeline to the immediate present.
This is where it gets wild.
Yeah. Option A, you can have 1 sip of juice right this very second. Option B, you can have 2 sips of juice, but you have to wait 5 minutes.
Notice that the fundamental equation has not changed a single digit. You are still just being asked to wait exactly 5 extra minutes to earn 1 extra sip of juice. If we are rational machines, the response rate should be exactly the same as the first scenario.
But the behavior violently flips. When that 1 sip was offered right now, logic just completely evaporated. Only 40% of the students could hold out for the extra 5 minutes. 60% of them just caved and took the immediate sip.
They abandoned the double reward for immediate gratification.
The math stayed exactly the same, but the human response inverted. Why does that happen?
Well, the MRI scans gave us the smoking gun. They revealed what is essentially a neurological civil war happening inside the skull.
A civil war.
Yeah. When the students were evaluating the distant choices, the 20-minute wait versus a 25-minute wait, the brain activity was heavily localized in the prefrontal cortex.
Which is like the evolutionary newcomer to the brain, right? The part that handles logic, abstract thinking, complex planning.
Exactly. You can think of the prefrontal cortex as the responsible adult in the room. It has the bandwidth to project into the future, run the math, and say, yes, 5 minutes is a trivial price to pay to double our hydration.
Makes total sense.
But when the choice involved an immediate reward, the juice being available right this second, the prefrontal cortex was suddenly overpowered. A completely different, much older part of the brain, lit up like a Christmas tree.
The amygdala.
The amygdala. It is the primitive, survival-driven core of the brain. From an evolutionary standpoint, the amygdala does not understand or care about the concept of tomorrow.
Right, because in a harsh hunter-gatherer environment, if you found calories, you consume them immediately.
Because they might be stolen or spoiled by the next day. The amygdala cares entirely about survival and the present moment. So when an immediate, tangible reward is placed on the table, the amygdala essentially hijacks the entire decision-making apparatus.
It just floods the system.
It floods the system with a craving so intense that the logical prefrontal cortex is basically tied to a chair and locked in the closet.
So when we joke about the diet starts tomorrow glitch or why we stay up until 2 in the morning doom scrolling when we know we have to work early, we are not necessarily suffering from a profound moral failure.
No.
We are literally experiencing a biological bug.
Precisely. Behavioral economists have a specific model for this bug. They call it hyperbolic discounting.
Let's avoid the academic terms, though. What does that actually mean for everyday life?
It means that the psychological burden of doing something difficult or restrictive today feels exponentially heavier than the idea of doing that exact same difficult thing tomorrow. We heavily, irrationally discount the value of the future, and we vastly overvalue the comfort of the present.
So on a biological level, my brain literally treats future me like a distant stranger that I just don't really care about.
Exactly. You're perfectly willing to throw future me under the bus.
Let him deal with the exhaustion, the debt, the health problems, just so present me can have a sip of juice or, avoid filling out a form today.
That is what the MRI data and the behavioral data prove.
Mm.
And when you scale that biological reality up to the level of an entire nation, it raises a terrifying question for public policy.
Yeah, how do you govern that?
Exactly. If our species is biologically hardwired to procrastinate, to avoid immediate friction at almost any cost, how can a government successfully rely on citizens to do the right thing for their own futures? How do you convince a population to save diligently for retirement, or adopt preventative health measures, or even just file their taxes on time when their amygdala is constantly screaming at them to just relax today and let tomorrow's version of themselves handle the fallout?
If your entire system relies on citizens engaging their prefrontal cortex for every mundane civic duty, your system is just going to collapse.
It will fail.
Which leads us to an even deeper layer of this problem. And this is something that completely shifts how you view society. We often look at people making undeniably poor life choices, taking out predatory payday loans, failing to enroll their kids in free health programs, ignoring vital deadlines.
And our societal instinct is to judge them.
Right. We assume they just lack the intelligence to understand the math, or they lack the moral fortitude to care. But this research introduces a much more empathetic and, frankly, a more terrifying explanation. What if they don't lack logic at all? What if they just lack bandwidth?
This is a pivotal paradigm shift in understanding human poverty and administrative failure. It introduces the concept of cognitive scarcity, which often manifests as profound inattention.
Okay, let's explore that. What exactly happens in the brain during cognitive scarcity?
The best way to visualize it is to think of your brain's active processing power like the RAM, the random access memory, in a computer. Every human being wakes up with a finite, limited amount of RAM available for the day.
Okay.
Now, when you are navigating life under conditions of severe chronic stress, maybe you are living below the poverty line and don't know how you'll pay rent, or you are facing massive time constraints as a single parent, or dealing with an acute family health emergency.
It's constant pressure.
Right. That ambient stress constantly runs in the background. It is an open application that eats up almost all of your available RAM. Your mental bandwidth simply maxes out.
It's like having 50 tabs open on your web browser. The computer is humming so loud it sounds like it's going to take off, and you try to type a simple email, but the letters take 3 seconds to appear on the screen. The system is just dropping frames.
That is a perfect analogy. You literally do not possess the surplus cognitive capacity to sit down, focus, and carefully evaluate complex, abstract, long-term decisions. It isn't that you are ignoring them out of malice or stupidity. You become entirely inattentive to them.
They don't even register.
They do not register on your radar because the radar is overwhelmed by immediate survival threats.
And for anyone who has read Daniel Kahneman's groundbreaking work, you know that human beings operate on 2 distinct modes of thinking, System 1 and System 2. But what's fascinating is how this Canadian policy paper applies Kahneman's theory directly to the architecture of government services.
Yes, Kahneman's dual system framework is really the lens through which all modern nudging is viewed. System 2 is the careful pilot of the airplane. It is deliberate, logical, highly analytical, and incredibly slow. But most importantly, System 2 requires an enormous amount of metabolic energy and cognitive bandwidth to operate.
It takes effort.
A lot of effort. System 1, on the other hand, is the autopilot. It's fast, intuitive, emotional, and requires almost zero effort. It relies entirely on ingrained habits, environmental cues, and mental shortcuts.
So, when a citizen is hit by the turbulence of poverty or acute stress, and that bandwidth crash happens, the careful pilot essentially passes out in the cockpit.
And the autopilot instantaneously takes the yoke. We default to System 1. If you are a parent working 2 minimum wage jobs, exhausted out of your mind, and a government envelope arrives in the mail asking you to evaluate the optimal interest rate structures for a new child benefit account,
Forget about it.
you do not have the System 2 resources available to read that document. You are operating on pure instinct. You glance at the complex form, your amygdala registers it as immediate friction, and the autopilot steers you to throw it in a drawer to deal with tomorrow.
And because of this mechanism, millions of people entirely miss out on life-changing, vital opportunities that are sitting right in front of them.
Exactly.
That reframing changes everything. It's not that they saw the optimal choice and rationally rejected it. They literally never perceived the choice. The autopilot steered right past it because the signpost was too complicated to read at high speed.
Furthermore, when we are flying on autopilot, our vulnerability to our immediate environment skyrockets. Specifically, we become highly susceptible to social identity cues.
The invisible gravity of the crowd.
Exactly. When your bandwidth is depleted, your brain refuses to ask the energy-intensive System 2 question, which is, what is the mathematically optimal choice for my specific situation? Instead, the brain subcontracts the thinking by asking a fast, cheap System 1 question. What does someone like me usually do in this situation?
Oh, that is insidious. We just outsource the decision to our peer group.
We look left, we look right, and we mimic. If our coworkers at the factory always take the stairs, we take the stairs to maintain cohesion. If everyone in our neighborhood buys a certain type of car they can't really afford, we do the same. If our peers traditionally do not invest in retirement accounts, the urge to conform to that social identity completely overrides any internal cost-benefit analysis.
Wow.
We would much rather be financially insecure but socially integrated than mathematically correct but isolated.
So when we look at citizens making decisions that keep them trapped in cycles of debt or poor health, we have to look at them through a lens of profound empathy. These are not moral failings. They are not character flaws or a lack of intellect. They are biological traffic jams.
That is the ultimate takeaway of behavioral economics. If you are a policymaker, you must accept that society is overwhelmingly flying on autopilot. Policy must be meticulously designed for the System 1 brain.
You can't just build an administrative state that demands a relaxed, fully attentive pilot.
Because millions of your citizens are navigating their daily lives in a state of cognitive scarcity.
Okay, so the theory is absolutely fascinating. But how does a sprawling, massive bureaucratic government actually operationalize this? Like, how do you restructure the machinery of the state to account for the autopilot brain?
Well, the paper traces the modern origin of this back to something incredibly mundane.
Yeah, a summer reading list in 2010. How did a casual reading list quietly initiate a restructuring of the British government and eventually the entire Canadian economic apparatus?
It is one of the great quiet revolutions in modern governance. It started with a profoundly influential book titled Nudge, co-authored by Cass Sunstein and Richard Thaler.
A legendary book in this space.
Absolutely. The book essentially argued that by understanding these cognitive biases, institutions could subtly guide people toward better choices without restricting their freedom. It was dense, but accessible, and it somehow ended up on the summer reading list for members of the British Conservative Party just before they took power.
And it struck a nerve.
It sparked an administrative revolution.
The birth of the nudge movement.
Exactly. By 2010, the UK government officially established the Behavioral Insights Team. The press quickly dubbed it the Nudge Unit.
Which sounds like a sci-fi agency.
It really does. It was a specialized task force whose sole mission was to take all these esoteric psychological quirks, present bias, cognitive scarcity, social identity, and weaponize them, for lack of a better term, to design highly effective, incredibly cheap public policies.
And to make it understandable for bureaucrats who weren't, neuroscientists, they distilled all this complex psychology into a golden rule, the EAST framework.
It is a brilliant acronym. Make it easy, Make it attractive. Make it social. Make it timely. Ease.
Easy, attractive, social, timely.
The philosophy was simple. If you want a citizen to do something beneficial, you don't mandate it. You don't threaten them with audits. You don't bombard them with information. You just meticulously hit those 4 pillars, and human nature will do the rest.
I want to zoom in on that very first pillar right now. Make it easy. Because applying that single concept led to what historians might eventually call the greatest public policy hack in modern history. Let's talk about the pension miracle.
This is the absolute gold standard for designing a system for the autopilot brain. Think about the landscape of retirement savings before this intervention. For decades, both governments and private corporations literally begged their employees to save for the future.
Right, printing glossy brochures showing happy seniors walking on beaches.
They held mandatory educational seminars, they offered employer-matching funds, they did everything they could to educate and appeal to the careful pilot, System 2.
They laid out the math perfectly. But as we established, the pilot is passed out and the autopilot is flying the plane.
Precisely. To actually secure that retirement money, an employee had to cross a threshold of friction. He had to actively fill out a form to opt in.
And here is where the biological bugs team up to destroy our futures.
Right. Because of present bias, the immediate psychological pain of spending 30 minutes reading dense financial paperwork heavily outweighed the vague, abstract benefit of having money 30 years in the future.
Yeah.
So people procrastinated.
And because of cognitive scarcity and inattention, once they put the form in a drawer, they completely forgot it existed.
The friction of the opt-in form was literally keeping millions of people in poverty. So the UK Nudge Unit looked at this and said, let's stop trying to fight human nature. Let's harness the procrastination.
Wow.
And they introduced the opt-out hack through the 2008 Pension Act, rolling it out massively in the 2012 workplace pension reform.
It was a masterstroke of administrative jujitsu. Tell them how it worked.
Instead of pleading with people to fill out a complex form to join the pension plan, they simply made enrollment automatic. The exact moment an employee was hired, they were enrolled. The default setting of their employment was switched from not saving to saving.
Okay, but what if they didn't want to save?
If the employee absolutely did not want to save, if they needed that cash in their paycheck right now, they were completely free to leave the program. They just had to check a box or make a phone call to opt out.
This is the crucial ethical point here. They didn't confiscate anyone's money against their will. They didn't pass a law making it illegal not to save. They preserved absolute free will. You could still choose to burn all your money on immediate gratification if you wanted to.
They just changed the default setting of the machinery.
And the behavioral result was nothing short of astonishing.
Under the old opt-in system, participation rates were dismal. Under the new automatic enrollment, only 8 to 14% of people bothered to overcome the friction of opting out. The vast, overwhelming majority simply rode the default setting into financial security.
It's staggering, like 8 to 14% is practically nothing.
By simply shifting the bureaucratic friction from the act of joining to the act of leaving, that one tiny administrative tweak, which cost almost nothing to implement, organically injected £6.6 billion into workplace retirement savings.
$6.6 billion just from moving a checkbox.
And long-term projections suggest it will eventually generate up to £16 billion in extra retirement wealth.
It's the exact same psychological mechanism that streaming services use. It's Netflix autoplaying the next episode of a show. When the credits roll, the physical friction required to stop the next episode, to find the remote in the couch cushions, point it at the screen, press menu, it's just high enough that we say, whatever, I'll just keep watching.
We let inertia take over.
But in the case of the pension, staying on the couch and letting inertia take over literally makes you a millionaire by the time you turn 65.
It is harnessing the power of human inertia for profound social good. And the success of this was not lost on policymakers across the Atlantic. The Canadian government scrutinized these UK numbers and utilized this exact behavioral logic to justify a massive enhancement of the Canada Pension Plan, the CPP.
Right, because for a long time, there was a fear among traditional economists that if the government forced a mandatory or automatic savings mechanism through the workplace, people would just realize what was happening and proportionally reduce their private savings.
They thought it would be a zero-sum game.
But the behavioral research proved them wrong. The data showed that this doesn't crowd out private savings at all. It actually creates entirely new, unprecedented wealth for a demographic of people who were previously completely paralyzed by the friction of opting in.
It acts as an invisible shield. It protects the citizen from the destructive tendencies of their own present bias and their own overloaded autopilot brain.
But saving your own money is one thing. What happens when the government actually wants to give you free money? Money from the state right now, today, and you still refuse to take it.
Oh, this shatters the standard economic model.
It really does. Let me pose a scenario to you. If I walked into your house and left a giant pile of free cash on your kitchen table, earmarked specifically for your child's college tuition, you would take it, right?
Under the assumptions of a rational calculating machine, absolutely. Every single time. There is no downside.
Statistically, in the real world, you probably wouldn't. This brings us to the Canada Learning Bond crisis. The Canadian government created a program to offer low-income families up to $2,000 for their children's post-secondary education.
And there were virtually no strings attached. You didn't have to contribute a single dime of your own money to unlock it.
It wasn't a matching grant. It was literally a free cash deposit waiting for you. And yet, the data from 2008 revealed that only a staggering 16% of eligible low-income households actually claimed it.
If you show that statistic to a classical economist from the 1950s, their model breaks entirely. It makes no logical sense. Why would a family living in poverty actively reject thousands of dollars of free money for their child's future?
The answer isn't that they didn't want the money. The answer is the nightmare of administrative friction.
Once again, we find ourselves returning to the reality of cognitive scarcity. For a high-income family with an accountant and free time, claiming that money is a minor errand. But for a low-income family already drowning under the bandwidth tax of poverty, the bureaucratic process required to retrieve that free money was a towering, unscalable mountain.
What did they actually have to do?
To get the bond, a parent first had to navigate a separate bureaucracy to acquire a social insurance number for their child. Then they had to take time off from their hourly wage job to physically travel to a private bank during standard working hours. They had to book an appointment, sit across a desk from a financial advisor, and fill out a massive, intimidating application form.
For a stressed brain operating on System 1, the cognitive cost, the intimidation factor, and the logistical friction of that paperwork completely outweighed the abstract value of $2,000 sitting in an account they couldn't touch for 15 years.
So an external organization called the Omega Foundation looked at this failure and stepped in with a brilliant behavioral intervention called the Smart Saver Program. They didn't waste resources printing flyers trying to educate the parents on the long-term compounding interest of the money.
They didn't try to change the parents' minds at all.
They just violently attacked the friction.
The first pillar of EAST, make it easy.
They bypassed the terrifying banking experience by building a streamlined, highly intuitive 5-step online form. And crucially, they flipped the onus of the transaction. Under the old system, the parent had to chase the bank. With Smart Saver, once the parent spent a few minutes completing those 5 simple steps online, their work was done.
The bank had to chase them.
Exactly. The bank was legally obligated to call them to finalize the account opening.
They put the cart on a downhill slope. So what were the results?
In Toronto, where they extensively piloted this new architecture, the uptake of the Canada Learning Bond surged from 27.7% to 39.3%. They didn't add more money to the grant, they just smoothed out the asphalt on the road.
But even that Canadian example isn't the most shocking proof of how paperwork paralyzes human potential. We have to look south to the United States for the ultimate example, the FFSA experiment.
Yes.
FSSA is the free application for federal student aid, essentially the gateway to all college financial assistance in the U.S. There was a massive landmark study conducted by Bettinger and his colleagues in partnership with the tax preparation company H&R Block.
If you study behavioral economics, this specific experiment is considered a masterpiece because it perfectly, surgically isolates the difference between providing a citizen with information versus providing them with assistance.
The setup here is brilliant. Imagine the setting. You have low-income parents who are already sitting in a sterile H&R Block office, anxiously getting their annual taxes done. The researchers specifically targeted parents who had a child currently in their senior year of high school. They divided these parents into different test groups.
Right.
The first group received what they called the information treatment. The tax preparer looked at the family's tax data, ran an algorithm, and handed the parent a customized, highly accurate estimate of exactly how much free federal grant money their specific teenager was legally entitled to.
So highly personalized.
Extremely personalized. They also handed them a clear, well-designed brochure listing the actual tuition cost of 4 nearby local colleges.
So they essentially removed the ambiguity. They pointed at a piece of paper and said, look, there is a giant pile of money waiting right here for your child to go to college. We have proven you qualify. Go get it.
Yes, it was perfect, personalized, hyper-relevant information. Now, the second group of parents received the personal assistance treatment. They were given the exact same customized financial information, but the tax preparer added one crucial sentence. They said, hey, since we already have all your sensitive financial data open right here on the computer screen to do your taxes, if you give me just 8 minutes of your time, I will port that data over and fill out the entire FAFSA student aid form for you right now and hit submit.
8 minutes of high-touch, frictionless help. No going home, no logging onto a different website, no hunting for tax forms. What did the data show?
The group that only received the perfect information, it had absolute zero impact.
Wait, I want to emphasize that. Zero impact.
Zero. Providing these families with life-changing, highly accurate financial information about thousands of dollars in grants had absolutely no statistical effect on whether their teenagers actually applied for aid or enrolled in college. The needle did not move a millimeter.
That is just...
But the group that received that 8 minutes of personal assistance, AFSA applications in that group jumped by a massive 16 percentage points. And even more profoundly, actual physical enrollment in college the following autumn rose by 8 percentage points.
That finding should be framed and hung in the office of every politician on earth. The real barrier keeping people trapped in intergenerational poverty isn't a lack of desire to improve their lives. It isn't a lack of ambition. And it certainly isn't a lack of information. The invisible cage is the sheer crushing friction of complex bureaucracy.
Information alone does not change human behavior. We think if we just build a better brochure, people will act. But the autopilot brain doesn't process brochures. It perceives them as noise.
The autopilot responds to immediate, frictionless paths.
The grand lesson here is that if you want to change a citizen's life trajectory, you don't give them a detailed map and wish them luck. You pave the road right to their front door.
Which brings us perfectly back to Canada, specifically Ontario, and a program that sounds almost absurdly simple. The question the researchers asked was, can a basic 3-hour high school workshop genuinely alter the long-term trajectory of a teenager's entire adult life?
It sounds like a motivational speaker's pitch, like 3 hours changes your life.
It actually works, provided you target the exact biological friction points. This was a massive initiative called the Life After High School Plan, designed by Oreopoulos and Ford. They specifically set their sights on what they called low-transition high schools.
Meaning kids who weren't going to college.
Exactly. These were schools in lower-income areas where the historical data showed that the vast majority of graduating seniors had zero intention of attending college or university. They had no plans, no savings, and no cultural momentum pushing them toward higher education.
The researchers understood the neurology of an 18-year-old. For a teenager, present bias is incredibly strong.
The prefrontal cortex isn't even fully developed yet.
Right. The concept of the future is totally abstract, whereas the immediate anxiety of the college application process, the passwords, the essays, the fees, is terrifyingly real. So they designed a program around a very specific low-pressure nudge. The messaging wasn't, you must go to college to succeed. The nudge was simply, keep your options open.
It's a brilliant framing.
Yeah.
Don't commit to a terrifying 4-year degree right now. Just prop the door open so you have a choice later. But the genius of the program was its physical implementation. They ran 3 one-hour workshops. But crucially, they did not run them after school, where the kids could just skip them to go play video games.
They mandated the workshops during regular required class time.
They hijacked the default environment.
Precisely. In the first workshop hour, they sat the kids down and showed them exactly which local college programs they could qualify for based purely on their existing current grades. They demystified the requirements. In the second hour, they forced the students to sit at computers and actually fill out the college applications right then and there.
And here is the kicker. The government program paid their application fees.
Which is usually around $50 to apply in Ontario.
They completely neutralized the financial friction that would normally trigger the amygdala to say, stop, we can't afford this risk.
And in the third and final hour, they sat with the kids and helped them initiate the financial aid applications, much like the FAFSA experiment. So we have 3 hours of class time for kids who had completely written off higher education. What did the data show?
The results were staggering. Across these low-transition schools, the rate of college applications soared from an average of 64% to 78%.
Just from filling out the forms on a Tuesday morning instead of taking a math quiz?
But applying is one thing, attending is another. The critical metric is that actual enrollment in higher education the following fall jumped by 5 percentage points across the board. But the most incredible, heartwarming statistic of the entire paper, when they looked specifically at the kids who were not even enrolled in university track courses, the students who were academically the furthest away from the college pipeline enrollment for that specific group jumped by 9 percentage points.
You literally rewrote their destinies in 3 hours.
By making the application the default, inescapable activity of the day, and by removing the $50 toll booth, they completely bypassed the amygdala's procrastination trap.
But getting a kid from a tough background into a university seat is only the first half of the battle. The attrition rates are brutal. You have to keep them there. And this brings up one of the most fascinating philosophical debates within the behavioral economics community: the tension between vast scale and deep impact. To explore this, let's look at another University of Toronto study, this one by Oreopoulos and Petronievich. They wanted to figure out how different levels of social support affect the academic performance of university freshmen.
This is a great study because it contrasts two very different types of nudges. The researchers divided the struggling freshmen into groups. The first group received what we call a low-touch nudge. The university set up an automated system that sent these students weekly text messages and emails.
And what did the text say?
They contained study tips, reminders about upcoming midterms, and general words of encouragement.
From an administrative standpoint, this is a dream. It's incredibly cheap. You write a script, push a button, and you can instantly scale this intervention to 1 million students across the country for pennies.
And the data showed that it did work, albeit mildly. The students who received the automated texts saw their overall grades increase by about 1.5 percentage points compared to the control group.
Which, hey, 1.5% might be the difference between a B- and a B. It's not bad for a text bot.
But then they evaluated a second group. This group received a high-touch nudge. The university assigned each of these freshmen a personal upper-year student coach. This was a real, empathetic human being who proactively met with them face-to-face, texted them personally, asked about their mental health, and actively monitored their academic struggles.
From an administrative standpoint, this is a nightmare. It is incredibly expensive. You have to hire, train, and manage an army of coaches. It is almost impossible to scale smoothly.
Very true. A single coach can only effectively manage a caseload of maybe 7 to 10 freshmen before their own bandwidth crashes. But the behavioral impact, the students with personal coaches saw their grades jump by a massive 6 percentage points.
So wait, hold on. I have to challenge this model, because if I'm a government bean counter looking at a limited budget, the math feels problematic. Cheap, low-touch nudges, like sending a weekly text message or moving a button on a website, give you these wide, shallow impacts. You get a 1.5% bump across 1 million people. But expensive, high-touch nudges, like hiring personal coaches or sitting a parent down for 8 minutes to do their taxes, give you deep, life-altering impacts. A 6 or 8% bump, but for a fraction of the population.
Right.
Does this mean public policy is perpetually trapped in a zero-sum trade-off between massive scale and deep, meaningful impact?
It is the central, agonizing dilemma of behavioral economics and public policy. You have perfectly articulated the tension. You have a finite budget. You can choose to nudge 1 million citizens an inch for free, or you can spend millions of dollars to push 100 citizens a mile. Most governments blend the two approaches. But it is crucial to understand that sometimes a tiny, practically zero-cost nudge doesn't just bump up a test score by 1%. Sometimes a tiny shift in administrative architecture is quite literally a matter of life and death for thousands of people.
Which takes us to one of the most sobering topics in the paper, the default setting of death.
It sounds dramatic, but it's true.
I have a somewhat morbid question to ask. If you look at the statistics in Europe, you will find that nearly 100% of citizens in Austria donate their organs when they pass away. Almost everyone. But right next door, in Germany, only about 12% of citizens donate. What is going on here? Are Austrians just incredibly genetically predisposed to be the most generous people on Earth, while Germans are profoundly selfish?
Of course not. These are two nations that share a border, they share a language, and they have massive cultural, religious, and economic overlap. The monumental difference in their organ donation rates is purely administrative.
It's just paperwork.
It traces back to a landmark study by Johnson and Goldstein on the power of default settings. Austria's legal architecture operates on a system of presumed consent. The legal default of the nation is that every citizen is an organ donor. If you strongly feel that you do not want to donate your organs, you absolutely have the right not to, but you have to actively fill out a government form to opt out.
So, relying on the exact same inertia we saw in the British pension system, nobody bothers to opt out. The autopilot brain avoids the paperwork, and the result is a donation rate hovering near 100%.
Conversely, Germany operates on a system of explicit consent. By default, you are not a donor. The state assumes you want to keep your organs unless you actively take the time to fill out a form to opt in.
And because of the friction of finding the form, filling it out, and mailing it, only 12% of the population manages to overcome the inertia.
But with organ donation, the friction isn't just logistical. It is deeply, profoundly psychological. Contemplating the concept of organ donation requires you to actively visualize your own death or the sudden death of your loved ones. That thought exercise spikes immediate, intense anxiety in the amygdala.
So people instinctively flinch away.
They procrastinate. They avoid thinking about the form entirely. And as a horrific consequence of that natural human avoidance, the bureaucratic default setting ends up dictating the fate of thousands of critically ill people waiting desperately on transplant lists.
So if the data is this stark, if switching the default saves thousands of lives practically overnight, why doesn't a country like Canada just instantly switch its laws to presumed consent?
Because behavioral nudging does not happen in a vacuum. It happens in a political reality. The provincial government in Ontario actually looked at this data and heavily considered switching to presumed consent. But when they ran public surveys and focus groups, the data showed that Canadians viscerally hated the idea. It felt deeply dystopian to them.
That makes total sense.
The public sentiment was that presumed consent implied the government fundamentally owned their physical bodies after death, and they were merely leasing them.
You cannot successfully implement a behavioral nudge if the public violently rebels against the invisible architecture. It breeds massive distrust.
Exactly. So Ontario's Behavioral Insights Unit was trapped. They couldn't use the opt-out miracle, but they knew the opt-in system was letting people die. They had to invent a middle ground. And they came up with something called a prompted choice system.
How does that work?
Under this system, you are not presumed to be a donor. But the state removes your ability to procrastinate by forcing you to make an active, recorded decision in order to access a totally unrelated government service. They integrated the question into the DMV, known there as Service Ontario. When a citizen goes in to renew their driver's license or health card, the clerk physically hands them the organ donation form and waits for an answer.
But they didn't just slap a standard, dry government form on the counter. This is where they brought in the behavioral scientists to craft a masterstroke of psychological framing.
They ran a highly controlled randomized trial inside a live Service Ontario center, testing multiple different versions of the form's text and layout. The most successful version simplified the visual clutter drastically, removing the dense legal jargon. But the real genius was a single question they placed right at the top of the page. It asked the citizen, if you needed a transplant, would you have one?
Oh, wow. I literally got goosebumps. That is brilliant design, because it immediately cuts through the abstract, terrifying fear of your own death, and it forces your brain to visualize the vulnerability of needing saving. It instantly activates a deep human sense of fairness and reciprocity.
It makes the tangible benefit of the system incredibly salient before you make your choice, and the behavioral result of that single sentence. Organ donation registrations in that trial skyrocketed by up to 143%.
Just by changing a few words printed on a piece of cheap paper at the DMV, it's almost alchemy.
Words matter immensely. The framing of a task dictates how the autopilot brain categorizes it. To give you a smaller but equally revealing example, look at public health and the flu shot.
Oh, this is a great one.
A team of U.S. researchers, led by Catherine Milkman, wanted to see if they could get more employees at a large corporate firm to take advantage of free on-site flu vaccinations. The standard procedure was simply to mass email everyone the dates and times the clinic would be open. But for one test group, they added a tiny, almost bizarre prompt to the email. They asked the employees to physically write down the exact time and date they personally planned to go get the shot.
Wait, they didn't ask them to email, reply, or book a calendar slot? Just privately write it down on a piece of paper?
Yes. And that specific group saw vaccination rates increase by 4.2 percentage points over the control group. Because neurologically, when you take an abstract, vague intention like I should really get my flu shot next week, and you force the brain to attach concrete variables to it, like Tuesday at 2:15 p.m., you move the past from the hazy realm of System 1 wishing into the structured reality of System 2 planning. You change your psychological reality.
It feels like magic, but it is just applied biology. And what's fascinating is that this immense power of specific wording extends far beyond health. It reaches right into the core of the macroeconomy. Can changing the words on a basic website link genuinely help reduce a country's unemployment rate?
It absolutely can, and the Canadian government proved it. This comes from an experiment run by Employment and Social Development Canada, or ESDC. The government had invested heavily in building this fantastic national database called Job Match. The idea was to create a centralized hub to seamlessly connect private employers with unemployed job seekers. But when they launched it, they hit a massive behavioral wall.
Let me guess. Friction.
Exactly. To actually use the database, an unemployed citizen had to create an account, which required spending about 20 tedious minutes filling out a profile, manually uploading their skills, detailing their past work experience, and verifying their identity.
Oof, 20 minutes.
The web analytics showed that thousands of vulnerable people were clicking the link, looking at the daunting 20-minute form, experiencing a bandwidth crash, and bailing out of the site entirely.
The stressed autopilot brain takes one look at 20 fields of data entry and says, this is too much work, I'm already overwhelmed, let's just go look at TikTok for 5 minutes to soothe the anxiety.
So the ESDC's internal innovation labs stepped in to run an A/B test on the live website. They didn't change the 20-minute form itself. They just tested 5 different visual designs and text variations for the initial button that users had to click to start the profile. Design 1 was the control group, a standard, visually boring button that just said, sign up to Job Match.
Very bureaucratic, very dry.
Design 2 tried a more urgent call to action phrasing. Design 3 utilized the concept of social norms, attempting to leverage that social identity we talked about earlier. The button said, thousands of Canadians have already completed their profiles.
Tapping into the what is everyone else doing instinct.
But Design 4 was the runaway winner. It heavily utilized a psychological concept called framing. It changed the text on the button to read, connect with employers looking for your skills and experience.
It completely reframes the narrative. Instead of the 20 minutes of data entry being framed as a chore you have to do for the government, it is framed as an immediate, highly flattering benefit to your own ego. Employers are actively out there looking for your specific skills. You aren't doing paperwork. You are unlocking demand for yourself.
That highly specific, ego-salient wording increased the rate of fully completed accounts by 15% compared to the generic control group button.
15% more unemployed citizens pushing through a complex 20-minute government form, entering the labor pool, and potentially finding life-changing work. And what was the actual financial cost to the taxpayer to change the text on that digital button?
Exactly $0. It is the purest example of a highly scalable, low-touch nudge generating tangible economic value out of thin air.
But as we debated earlier, sometimes low-touch nudges aren't enough to break deep systemic cycles. Sometimes you need high-touch magic. I want to shift gears and talk about one of the most resource-intensive interventions in the paper, the welfare experiment in Manitoba.
This is a phenomenal case study in understanding human dignity within public policy. The Social Research and Demonstration Corporation ran a major pilot project with Employment and Income Assistance, or EIA, recipients in Winnipeg. We're talking about individuals dealing with complex long-term poverty. Under the traditional old-school welfare model, the system is highly directive and compliance-based. A caseworker sits across a desk, looks at a file, and dictates commands to the client.
You need to go apply for these 3 specific jobs, take this specific skills course, and come back next Tuesday with proof, or we cut your check.
Right. It relies on external pressure and the threat of punishment. It assumes the client lacks the motivation or intelligence to guide themselves. But for the pilot project, the government spent money to deeply train a specific group of caseworkers in a psychological technique called motivational interviewing.
What exactly does motivational interviewing entail?
It is a deeply empathetic, client-centered counseling style originally developed in the addiction treatment field. Instead of the caseworker acting as an authority figure dictating orders, the caseworker approaches the interaction with the fundamental assumption that the client already possesses the intrinsic capacity and desire to change their own life. The caseworker uses highly structured, guided questions to help the client articulate their own frustrations, set their own personal goals, and realize their own potential solutions.
So if the traditional welfare model is like trying to violently drag a heavy cart up a steep hill by pulling on a rope, motivational interviewing is like putting the cart on finely oiled wheels, standing back, and letting the person realize they have the strength to push it up the hill themselves.
That is exactly the dynamic. It completely shifts the locus of control from the state back to the individual. The researchers rigorously tracked these clients over many months. The data revealed that the participants who interacted with caseworkers trained in motivational interviewing were 6.8 percentage points more likely to exit the welfare program entirely, securing stable employment, compared to the control group receiving standard directive counseling.
In the context of entrenched systemic poverty, moving the needle by almost 7% is a massive seismic achievement.
And if you are a skeptic who only cares about the bottom line, the economics of this empathy are undeniable. When the researchers calculated the cost of training the caseworkers versus the long-term reduction in welfare payouts, that high-touch intervention generated a net permanent savings to the government of $405 per person.
It is an incredible paradox. You treat vulnerable citizens with genuine psychological empathy, you empower them to drive their own destiny instead of treating them like children, and it actually saves the state millions of dollars.
It proves definitively that behavior change isn't just about tricking people with cleverly colored buttons or manipulating their laziness. At its highest level, behavioral economics is about deeply understanding human motivation and removing the psychological barriers that crush human potential.
Okay, we're entering the home stretch of the paper, and I want to save time for my absolute favorite hack in the entire document. It is brilliant in its simplicity. Let's talk about the honesty hack.
Ah, yes, the famous Canada Revenue Agency experiment.
Yes. Let's say you are the government and you want citizens to stop lying on their tax returns. How do you achieve that? The traditional neoclassical model has one very blunt tool: deterrence. You vastly increase the financial penalty for tax fraud, and you ramp up the threat of terrifying invasive audits. You try to make the mathematical punishment so severe that the logic of lying collapses.
But from an administrative standpoint, audits are incredibly slow, highly adversarial, and extremely expensive to conduct. And more fundamentally, threats of future punishment do not always deter a stressed autopilot brain that is currently panicking about how to pay next month's rent. The immediate gain of hiding a few $1,000s in cash income easily overwhelms the abstract statistical fear of getting audited 3 years from now.
So the behavioral scientists at the CRA looked at this problem and realized there was a fundamental structural flaw in how almost every single legal form in the history of the world is designed. Think about it. Where do you sign a tax form?
At the very bottom, on the absolute last page after all the data entry is complete.
Right. You spend an hour sitting at your kitchen table, stressed out, filling in your income. Maybe you conveniently forget to declare a few cash jobs you did on the side.
Right.
Maybe you creatively inflate a few home office deductions. You rationalize it to yourself. You lie and you lie and you lie. And then at the very end of the process, you sign a little box at the bottom that says, "I legally promise everything above is true and accurate."
By the time your pen hits the paper, the psychological damage is already done. You have already fully committed to the lie. Rationalizing the false signature at the end is effortless because you've already justified the fake numbers to yourself.
Exactly. So relying on groundbreaking research by Nina Mazar, Dan O'Reilly, and others, the CRA ran an unbelievably simple experiment. They didn't change a single tax law. They didn't increase the fines by a penny. They didn't threaten more audits. They just took the signature box from the bottom of the page and moved it to the very top.
Before the citizen is allowed to fill out a single number,
You open the form, and the very first thing you have to do is sign your name, print it clearly, right next to a bold warning about honesty. You have to pledge your integrity first.
the underlying psychology here is elegant and profound. The physical act of signing your own name is deeply tied to your self-image. When you sign first, it acts as a powerful psychological primer. It violently awakens the moral, honest part of your identity. It forces System 2 to boot up and take the wheel. You are actively, consciously declaring your integrity to yourself before the amygdala even has a chance to be tempted by the idea of hiding income.
It essentially pre-commits you to being a good person. And it is arguably the cheapest, most efficient revenue-generating policy in the history of government. They recouped millions in lost tax revenue simply by moving a printed box 1 inch up a piece of paper.
And with this specific experiment, along with the organ donation prompt, the pension auto-enrollment, and the FAFSA assistance, what all of this reveals to the public is the existence of an invisible, highly active ecosystem operating right under our noses. The paper makes it clear that behavioral economics is no longer a fringe academic theory endlessly debated in university faculty lounges. It has quietly become the core operating system, the underlying brain of Canadian public governance.
It really is everywhere once you know what to look for.
The institutional buy-in is massive. The Federal Privy Council Office operates a dedicated innovation hub. The province of Ontario runs its own behavioral insights unit. Massive agencies like the CRA and the ESDC have built their own internal behavioral laboratories, and they are quietly running randomized control trials, massive RCTs on the citizenry every single day. They are constantly A/B testing the layout of tax forms, the phrasing of welfare letters, the architecture of organ donation registries. They're even partnering with mobile apps, like the Carrot Rewards app in British Columbia, which use behavioral nudges to give citizens actual loyalty points like aeroplane miles, just for hitting their daily step counts or completing health quizzes. They are meticulously optimizing every single micro-interaction between the citizen and the state to save tax dollars and dramatically improve societal outcomes.
Which brings us to the final, unavoidable dilemma of this entire deep dive. We have to talk about the elephant in the room. Because when you say the government is quietly running randomized controlled trials on the citizenry every single day, a lot of people's alarms are going to go off. We have to ask, are we being gently, benevolently nudged toward better, healthier lives? Or are we being silently, paternalistically manipulated by a government playing our psychological strings like a master puppeteer?
It is the single most common and most valid ethical criticism leveled against the entire field of behavioral economics. The anxiety is real. If an anonymous bureaucrat can artificially inflate an organ donation rate by 143% just by tweaking a single sentence, or trick millions of people into locking away billions of dollars simply by pre-checking a box on a form, where does our free will actually reside? Aren't we being reduced to predictable lab rats running through a giant state-designed administrative maze?
It feels incredibly sinister and manipulative when you frame it like that. It feels like a violation of autonomy.
It can absolutely feel that way. And in the hands of malicious actors, these tools are routinely used for exploitation. Just look at how social media algorithms harvest our attention. But Cass Sunstein, the co-author of Nudge, offers a very powerful, highly pragmatic philosophical defense for why democratic governments must use these tools. He calls it the defense of inevitability.
Walk me through that. What does the defense of inevitability mean in practice?
It means that in the physical and administrative world, there is absolutely no such thing as a neutral design. Every single policy, every government form, every public building, every website must have a default setting. A form has to be designed somehow. The tax signature box has to be placed physically somewhere on the page. The stairs and the escalator in the subway station have to be built in some specific spatial configuration.
Right. You cannot not have an architecture. The absence of a choice is still a choice made by a designer.
Exactly. Chaos is still an architecture, and usually a highly destructive one. So, Sunstein argues, if a default setting is structurally inevitable, and decades of scientific data prove definitively that defaults heavily, predictably influence human behavior, isn't the government morally obligated to consciously design the specific default that makes you healthier, richer, and more honest? If the data proves that an opt-in pension system will inevitably leave millions of vulnerable citizens rotting in poverty, and an opt-out pension system will make those exact same citizens wealthy, choosing to maintain the opt-in system isn't a noble defense of free will, it's just terrible, destructive design.
It crosses the line into administrative negligence. If you know the bridge is broken and you don't put up a sign, you are responsible for the cars that fall in.
Precisely. And the core tenet of ethical behavioral economics is that it is never about removing choice. It is about organizing the choices. Think of the GPS analogy.
I really love this analogy. Let's expand on it.
When you get in your car and turn on your GPS, it analyzes the vast, complex landscape of traffic, accidents, and road closures. It calculates the variables you don't have the bandwidth to process. And then it gently suggests the fastest, safest route to your desired destination. It paints a blue line on the screen. It might even beep at you if you miss a turn. It is actively nudging you. But, and this is the critical ethical distinction, your hands are still firmly on the steering wheel. The GPS is not driving the car. The government is not locking the doors. If you decide you really want to ignore the blue line, take the scenic route, sit in 3 hours of traffic, or drive the car straight into a ditch, you retain the absolute, uninfringed liberty to do so. The nudge simply ensures that the smartest, most beneficial path is also the easiest path to follow.
It doesn't override our biology, it patches the glitches, it builds guardrails so that the best intentions of our logical prefrontal cortex can actually survive the daily chaotic stress of our overloaded amygdala.
That is beautifully said. It is economics finally wearing a human face. It stops demanding that we be perfect, calculating robots. It accepts us exactly as we are, deeply flawed, constantly distracted, highly emotional, and easily overwhelmed, and it endeavors to build a world that helps us thrive anyway.
That is a profoundly optimistic, fascinating place to land. It completely reframes how I look at the world around me. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a challenge. Tomorrow morning when you wake up, I want you to actively monitor the choices you make. Think about the coffee you decided to buy. Look at the specific emails you answered first. Notice the layout of the apps on your phone. Observe the stairs you didn't take. And ask yourself, how many of those choices were actually yours, born from deep, logical deliberation? And how many of them were quietly, seamlessly designed by someone else's invisible architecture? Stay curious, be kind to your autopilot brain, and watch your step.